Hey, seventh grade, it's Mrs. Sherwood again. I'm going to attempt to record my narration while I feed JP. So if you hear him, that's what's going on. So this next session is all about perspective. We know that the perspective that we've been reading from is with that of a future lens, and we want to make sure that we're identifying the perspectives of not just past and present, but also of minor characters versus major characters. And so we know that the minor characters in this in our text are going to play pretty significant roles, even though they're not significant roles within the author's narration of the story. So let's go ahead and go through this together. And I'm gonna make sure I grab my pointer because it's really fun to use. Okay, so try to give voice to the people in this picture. If they could talk, what would they say? Write down their story in your notebook, and I want you to spend 5 minutes. I'm going to go ahead and keep this live, so you're going to probably hear JP in the background, and I apologize about this, but you can choose any one of these characters to write their story, okay? But choose their perspective. Does that make sense? So if I'm writing about this woman right here, I might write with a certain intonation, okay? Does that make sense? Spend 5 minutes to do that right now. About 2 minutes left to write down your character's story from their perspective. If they could talk, what would they say? You can even add in any of their actions or their feelings or thoughts, because we know that's how to develop a really strong character. You could even talk about like what time period are they experiencing? How are they reacting to their setting? What's the conflict that they're dealing with? wrap up your thoughts in the last minute or so. Obviously, if you want to take more time on this later on, you're more than welcome to. This could be your journal for the day if you want. Okay, all done. So we'll move on. So your learning target today is that readers of historical fiction, or HF, pay attention to minor characters and their point of view in a story in order to better understand the time period. You can always pause this if you wanted to take more time to write down. So think of your first thoughts. Did you notice the woman? Did you notice the boy on the left? What about the boy down here, or girl, depending on what you thought? What might they be thinking? Think about that and look back at your writing. Did you talk about their perspectives? Did you talk about this one? This one? I see a lot of anguish in this picture and exhaustion from this one. We don't know what's going on exactly because we have no words, but we can just imagine the different perspectives that they might be thinking about. So we talk about perspective in the book Patrol a lot, right? We talk about how secure the village, a sergeant calls, and he points towards the enemy. His perspective of this is that he's just the soldier listening to different directions. What might the perspective of the enemy be? And also, the sergeant, that's a minor character in this story. So what might be the perspective of his own character? Secure the village, he's got a job too. He points towards the enemy. He's not thinking the same compassionate thoughts that our soldier is feeling, right? He is just thinking about the orders that he needs to deliver to his troops. So when we bring it back to the main character, we talk about how does a minor character influence the main character's character traits? Well, we know that the character trait of our soldier is that he's compassionate, right? And this is where the conflict is happening with our soldier, because the sergeant, who's a minor character, influences our soldier to go against his main character trait of compassion and to go ahead and follow the orders that he's supposed to do during this time period. So how does the sergeant's perspective help fill in the gaps of the soldier's story? Well, this helps us identify that the soldier has a job to do, and that's why he's conflicted. So the minor character is actually helping to contribute to the internal conflict and external conflict of what's going on in the character's head. And then finally, are there other characters in the story to also give different perspectives? So we can think about in this story, what about the enemy? What does the other soldier think about? What about the babies that he talks about? We don't even know the perspectives of them, but we can just imagine what they might be thinking, right? So due to the worry from the sergeant, the soldier must feel a surreal amount of pressure. He cannot afford to be peaceful or compassionate in times of war. The expectations from his sergeants weigh too much. So that was an example of like what you might say in your notebook, or even in a Google Doc or a Flipgrid or a Zoom conversation, no matter what. But these are important questions to bring back to your book club group. Okay. So make sure that you're asking that of each other. Okay. What can we learn from this perspective? Okay, so we're looking at this perspective right now, okay? The enemy. A brown woman with rivers of age etched deeply into her face. An old man, his eyes heavy with memory. And babies. Little enemies crying on the mud roads. Little enemies with tears running down dusty cheeks. I'd like you to just take a moment and write down your initial thinking from this perspective. We know that it's a compassionate perspective. We know that we can learn that he's a compassionate soldier. But what can we really learn about him here? Think about that. War is an unfair trap. That's what I take from this. So no matter what type of person you are, you're going to struggle with some kind of like inner conflict and inner dialogue. And the way that I identify this is I identify the characters, I pull them into the spotlight, and I gave each of them a voice. So the babies that he talks about, the brown woman with rivers of age etched deeply into her face, little enemies crying on mud roads, like each of those people have a voice. And it's just not fair the way that our soldier is describing them. He feels for them, but he has to be there because it's wartime. And so I come to the conclusion that he feels like war is a trap and it's not fair. Okay, so this one, we've read this one before, and I think if we were doing this live, I would have had you do the same type of thinking, right? So this one is talking about the soldier that he comes into contact with. So I'll read it out loud again, and I want you to take 2 minutes and write about the voice that the soldier must have. What is the soldier thinking in this time? Not our soldier from patrol, but the other soldier, the enemy soldier. What do you think he is thinking? So, a shot. I reach for the ground and scramble for the clover. The elephant grass cuts my arms as I slide toward a low wall. Then there is an opening in the tall grass, and I look through. There is the enemy. He is looking at me. We are surprised to see each other, shocked how young he is. We stare across the distance. I know he wants me to lift my rifle, to be the enemy. I want him to lift his rifle. I want him to turn away. In a heartbeat, we have learned too much about each other. You know, another thing that would be interesting is if you wrote the exact same passage, right? But wrote it from the perspective of the enemy soldier, how would it look different? Or what would be the same? Maybe take a couple lines from what the soldier wrote and then change it so that it makes more sense from the enemy's perspective. Take 2 minutes to do that and write that down. Take 30 more seconds to write down your thinking. And stop. Okay, moving on. So I know that some of your book clubs are not represented in here, and I apologize about that. I will fix that for later. But in your book clubs, you're going to do the same kind of work, right? So you're going to make sure that when you are talking in your book clubs, you're giving your minor characters a voice. So those of you reading like A Night Divided, you're going to think about like the mother. What kind of mother leaves her child during this time of like tragedy, right? She left Greta alone. Like, why would she do that? So maybe write about like what she might have been thinking and why she decided to do the things that she did. And then finally, you want to add this red part to your anchor chart. Okay. So down here it says, what are the perspectives of the minor characters? And you can even do some deeper thinking about that. But I really want you to try to answer that question today. And you're going to answer that in the Google Classroom assignment that I post. Trying to think if there's anything else. Remember, your learning target is tracking your thinking and gathering evidence to foster new understanding of the text and really understanding that minor characters make a difference. And you're going to take a look at some of your thinking from later on in the book. And I want you to take the Post-it or think about it and apply it to the beginning. To the beginning of to the beginning of the novel. Use this Post-it to bring a different lens to your earlier reading, really thinking about that minor character, right? There is a couple more slides that I'd like you to think about. So when we revise and we rethink about the things that are going on, like revising interpretations to include more of the book, things have changed a bit from the beginning. So maybe you talk about that. This is kind of work outside of minor characters. So once you're done analyzing what the minor characters have been doing, you might want to talk about some of these items. It seems as if there's a pattern, like this keeps happening or this keeps returning often in the book. At first it seemed as if, but now it seems more like, so these are good sentence starters to help you, and I hope it does help you. And then finally, gathering evidence to include more of the book. You're going to talk about where specifically are you seeing it. So like according to chapter 2, we saw this happening. What in the story makes you say that? These are really good things to say to your book club members, especially if you're just typing out questions and typing responses to each other. These are good sentence starters to say that to each other. Finally, for your purposeful practice, so in order to practice this, you're going to continue analyzing the characters and their reaction to conflict. You're going to continue your historical and personal timelines. Don't forget about those. And you're going to continue finding perspectives of minor characters to fill in the gaps of the main characters. That's your big focus today. The last couple slides I just shared, that's like more for your book club conversations. You need to make sure you spend some time responding to what the book is saying. So a lot of you are done with your first book. What I'd like you to do is still work in that book for a little bit and really dig deep into what the character perspectives are in that book. And maybe you need to do a little bit of rereading of certain chapters because the first time through you probably only paid attention to the main character, but maybe taking some time to look at some minor characters might help you understand why the main character decided to do certain things that they did. Okay? So again, talk about how your theory might have changed about a character because of how you looked into the minor characters. Explain how and post that into the Google Classroom assignment. Thanks, you guys. I miss you and hope to see you soon.